coming up on Lawmakers. Governor Perdue wants to allow faith-based organizations to receive tax dollars to provide social services. A preview of tomorrow night's statewide forum on educational excellence. And the view of tort reform from a patient's perspective. Those stories and more are next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers for Wednesday, January 26. Here are your anchors, Gerald Bryant and Nwandi Lawson.
Good evening, everyone. Also on tonight's program, the governor's conservation legislation makes fast progress.
And we'll get all the latest Capitol buzz from Tom Crawford of CapitolImpact.com. But our top story tonight, the governor's Faith and Family Services Amendment. Speaking at the Georgia Baptist Convention breakfast this morning, Governor Perdue took the opportunity to drum up support for his Faith and Family Services initiative. The governor proposes amending the state constitution to allow sectarian groups to receive state funds. Lawmakers Jesse Freeman is live with more. Jesse.
Well, thanks, Nwandi. Last year, the Faith and Family Services Amendment passed out of the Senate but failed to make it out of the House. The governor says he intends to try again this year. He asked for the support of the Georgia Baptist Convention at this morning's breakfast.
I want the state to be able to partner with you all who are out there doing those kind of things and meeting those social services. Here's why. It's pretty simple. I'm a businessman. I look at things from the right perspective, but I also look at things from a business perspective. It's a good value. You already have a body of volunteers. You typically will have administrative setup. You have a calling, a passionate volunteer, laborers there who are willing to do these things. Oftentimes, your horizon is limited by resources that may not reach as far as you want to.
Perdue says that public funds should be used to extend that reach and that the concept of freedom of religion should not prohibit the state from doing so.
We have people there in this nation and even in this state who would try to erase any mention of God, anything that has to do with spiritual matters, away from any public institution or any public entity. Now, folks, I don't think that's right.
Now, to amend the state constitution, the Faith and Family Services Amendment would be filed as a resolution and would need support from a two-thirds majority in both houses. Such a resolution has not yet been filed. Reporting live, I'm Jesse Freeman for Lawmakers.
Now, Jesse, before you go, did the governor give any indication of when we might see that legislation turn up?
Well, in Nwandi, he did not, but I talked to one of a spokesman from his office today, and she said we could see a resolution as early as tomorrow, so we'll keep an eye on it.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Also today, the governor's House Floor Leader, Rich Golick, filed two bills intended to reform Georgia's criminal justice system. Governor Perdue said, quote, "These proposals will correct inequities in our laws that prevent crime victims from receiving the fairness and justice they deserve," unquote. The Criminal Justice Act of 2005 would, among other things, provide an equal number of jury strikes for both the defense and prosecution. The Crime Victims Restitution Act of 2005 would reduce barriers that victims face in being awarded and collecting restitution.
A proposal to require hospitals to ask unmarried women the names of their children's fathers is being considered in the House. Representative Ben Bridges says he introduced the Baby's Right to Know Act so that children can access their full medical records. The law would not force women to give the fathers' names. Also in the House, Representative Depose Porter today introduced legislation to provide benefits for reservists who serve in Iraq.
If you were there when they received those last hugs from their spouses and their children, you would know what I mean, that we want our families to know that in this body, that in this winter, as they have gone to be trained before they are to go abroad, that this body and this General Assembly is thinking of what we can do to help and support them.
The series of three bills provides grants, a tax exemption, educational incentives, and increased life insurance for those reservists. Representatives from both parties have signed on to support the bill. And also in the House, a tip from a newspaper reporter led Representative Tyrone Brooks to introduce a bill to repeal segregation-era laws, including one which would allow the governor to close public schools to prevent integration.
In the 60s, to fight integration, many schools simply said, we're going to allow white children to leave the public schools and go to the segregation academies, and we are going to fund them with public monies. That's another law we found. Another law we found was one that impacted neighborhoods in terms of where you could live, to make sure that if blacks and whites were found living in the same neighborhood, that real estate prices could be affected. And you know, we found another law that says law enforcement officers who did not enforce the laws of segregation could lose their pensions.
And finally in the House today, shoppers may benefit from another sales tax holiday this summer. A House bill was introduced today that would exempt school supplies, clothing, and computers from sales tax between July 28th and July 31st.
In other news, in the first of their weekly press briefings, Democratic leaders today spoke out against the new House rules, calling the practice of allowing so-called hawks to vote in all committees outrageous. Representative DeBose Porter said the rules are detrimental to Democrats and to independent-minded Republicans.
We also had the rule where every district represents 40-something thousand people, but every member served on 3 committees. You didn't stack the number in the committees. Certainly you have a majority, you're going to have more members on the committee, but you had fair debate and a way to get consensus across party lines. This way, not only is it disadvantage to Democrats, but renegade Republicans is probably who it's aimed at the most.
Now, Democrats say they plan to address the issue of party switching in an ethics reform package to be introduced next week, apparently referring to Representative Hinson Mosley, who left the Democratic Party days after being elected in November. Calvin Smyre said party switching should be prohibited or at least penalized.
We felt that a person in good conscience should repay those funds to receive funds from either party and to deceive the voters after being elected. To me, that's the highest point of hypocrisy. 2 days after you are elected by the people in a district and you use the Democratic money to get elected and you run, you ought to serve out that term, you should run for re-election.
Meanwhile, Governor Sonny Perdue's conservation initiative receives a due pass by the House Natural Resources and Environment Committee. Lawmakers Chris Knight joins us live from the Capitol with more on House Bill 98.
Gerald, the Georgia Land Conservation Act unanimously passed through committee today. The legislation would replace the green space program currently in place. House Bill 98, or the Georgia Land Conservation Act, unanimously passes through the House Natural Resources and Environment Committee.
But what made this a unanimous vote today was the fact that the past 16, 18 months, there's been a study group working on these issues, and so it's a year-and-a-half long process, and when you do something that involved, then you get as close to making the bill work as anything.
The governor says this initiative is more far-reaching than any previous conservation efforts in the state. Among those supporting the legislation include the Georgia Municipal Association.
We lend our wholehearted support to this effort.
The Georgia Conservancy.
We believe the governor's program and the bill embody some really big ideas that will move our efforts for land conservation forward in Georgia.
And while the Sierra Club lends their support, the group is quick to point out one area of concern.
The biggest substantive change that we see that was a problem for the Sierra Club is the loss of the goal of acquiring 20% of the land area of each metropolitan county for preservation. That was a goal in the Barnes program. That language is now going to be struck.
And House Bill 98 now goes to the House Rules Committee. Reporting live, I'm Chris Knight for Lawmakers.
Chris, remind us again how much money has been funded to jumpstart the initiative if it does pass.
Gerald, $100 million in state, federal, and private funds are committed to the program.
All right, Chris, thank you very much.
Well, as the governor's education package makes its way through the Senate, a group who's working outside the legislature, is working to update the Quality Basic Education Act, the funding formula for the state's public schools. Earlier, the chair of the Education Finance Task Force told me that with the QBE approaching its 20th birthday, it's time for a change.
The reality of it is, after 20 years of modification, it has become so complex it rivals the IRS in complexity. And it also is that we're not sure that it's given us, obviously, the results we want in student achievement. So we began to think about perhaps we should replace QBE with a brand new formula and a brand new way of thinking. And we recognize that if we're going to replace that, we need to have a vision for what the new formula would look like. And so we went ahead and named it, and we named it Investing in Educational Excellence. And a very important part of that, of course, is that concept of investing versus funding. And when you invest in something, you expect a return, and we think that return should be measured in student achievement. And for a long time in the state, we've talked about adequate education and basic education. If our students are going to compete on a global economy, then we need to be talking about excellent. And so the genesis of all this was based on that vision of a new formula. And the beginning of developing investing in education is the concept of where do we want to be and what does excellence look like. So Thursday night will be about having the citizens of this state participate in a conversation and helping us to identify that.
Let's talk a little bit about Thursday night. If someone wants to participate, what are some of the ways they can do that, and what exactly will they be doing?
There's several ways they can participate. We have over 23 sites across the state that they can participate in. And if they'd like to know where those sites are, they can visit our website, www.ie2.org. And they'll be able to identify those sites. Most of those are high school facilities, and they can go there and participate. Or they can join us via the web, and we'll be basically simulcasting through the web, but also they can participate via the web and thereby emailing us back some of the answers to some of the questions we're going to be asking. The format is very different. Sometimes people think this is going to be like a town hall meeting or a hearing where people get up and only a handful people get a chance to say something. This is going to be truly a conversation like you would have around your kitchen table with your neighbors and your friends around coffee. And we're going to give them some of the student indicators we use today to measure student achievement. And we're going to ask them, look at where we are today, and when we talk about excellence, where do those need to be in the future? What are those indicators, and what level need they to be if we're going to be an excellent system?
Well, now, after the folks leave this discussion and have had a chance to talk about that, what happens with the findings from that?
Well, what will happen is, of course, we will use that to establish our recommendations, which we think is a very important milestone, is the way we think of education in the state. And what I mean by that is many of the programs we've had in the past and formulas, we've never had a desired outcome. And so, for the first time, we will have an established outcome that we want to accomplish with the dollars we're investing in education. So once we know what we want to accomplish, then we'll talk about how do we get there. The task force will be looking at best practices and the requirements to accomplish that. Then and only then will we build a cost model to determine what the cost is. Too many times you start off with, gee, what can we spend, or what's available, versus starting off saying, what do you want to accomplish, how do you get there, and then what's the cost. We think this is much more of a business-like approach.
And speaking of business, obviously you have experience in both business as well as in the legislature. What do you see as being the impact of funding on potential future excellence for our students here in Georgia?
Well, I think what's really important here is as we look at moving forward, is that the student body has changed, obviously, over the past 20 years. Our economy has changed, and much of what we do. And so the fact that we have technology, and as we even talk about the virtual school program, we now need to sit back and say, how do we do what we're doing more effective and more efficient? If you're not careful, you can really focus on just trying to do things the right way, but not necessarily doing the right things. And so we want to work on both sides of that equation. We want to make sure we're doing the right things, but also doing them the right way.
All right, sounds good. Well, we'll be looking forward to finding out what happens in that discussion on Thursday. We thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
And communities around the state can take part in the Investing in Educational Excellence Forum. Georgia Public Broadcasting will be broadcasting that introduction to the summit, featuring Dean Alford, State School Superintendent Kathy Cox, and Governor Sonny Perdue. That's tomorrow at 7 p.m. And lawmakers will be seen tomorrow at 7:30 p.m.
In related news, the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Education received an in-depth overview today on the way K-12 education is funded in the state. John Brown, the director of the Education Division at the Office of Planning and Budget, briefed the subcommittee on the Quality Basic Education, or QBE, formula. Among the issues discussed during the meeting included teachers' salaries.
The teacher salary for the state of Georgia is about 98% of the national average. The national average salary is $46,800, and the average teacher salary in Georgia, the average now, not the beginning, but the average is $45,900.
A total of $6.9 billion is set aside for funding quality basic education in Georgia.
Testimony for and against tort reform legislation was the subject in Monday and Tuesday's Judiciary Committee meetings. David Zelski joins us live with an overview of where this debate is headed. David.
Well, thanks, Nwandi. There's no question that insurance premiums have risen in Georgia, but the current bill, which aims to aid the system, Senate Bill 3, is facing some heavy opposition, primarily when it comes to caps on non-economic damages and immunities for emergency room physicians. Committee Chair Preston Smith, a lawyer himself, is the main sponsor of Senate Bill 3, a 5-part bill that he believes will bring down medical malpractice insurance rates and health care premiums. The Georgia Hospitals Association agrees with Senator Smith.
We are seeing out in the field, in the hospital field, both with physicians and hospitals, of access points being closed off because of rising costs in general, some related to malpractice and other reimbursement issues.
What they're afraid of is not being paid, it's whether or not they're going to be sued from seeing a patient that they don't know in the emergency environment to deliver acute care.
Proponents of the bill say doctors are leaving the state because of escalating malpractice insurance rates and lawsuits with high-dollar settlements. Sherry Campbell of Watkinsville lost her OBGYN in the middle of her pregnancy.
Suddenly there was no safety net. I had nobody who wanted to take care of me, it felt like, and my baby. And because I am of advanced maternal age, I knew that there were going to be special problems. I was in the midst of testing for the Down syndrome, for example, and I knew I needed extra care, and suddenly it wasn't available to me.
Parts of Senate Bill 3, dealing with caps and immunities, have stalled tort reform in years past.
There are some pieces that are so draconian and so outright take away people's rights that we have to stand on principle and oppose those, and those are the caps and the immunity provisions.
I had had a hysterectomy the week before. There were indications there were problems with the wound, but they didn't do anything about it. That night the wound oozed. In the morning I called my doctor. She had me come into the office. She placed me up on the gyno bed in order to clean the wound. As she cleaned it, she pulled on it, and it opened up hip to hip. She then left me there on the table alone, like that. Estimates I was left 25 to 35 minutes. I went into shock, lost consciousness, and fell from the bed. And when I fell from the bed, my head hit the counter, which broke my neck. But the fact is, with the $250,000 cap, my case would never be filed. I would just slink into oblivion and no one ever know anything ever happened.
Now, the next committee meeting is scheduled for 3:30 tomorrow afternoon, where taking a vote is a possibility. Reporting live, I'm David Zelski for Lawmakers.
Now, David, there's also been some talk about insurance reform legislation, so what's the status of that?
That's actually Senate Bill 22, sponsored by Senators Mitch Seabaugh and Preston Smith, and it's been read once and assigned to the Insurance and Labor Committee.
All right, thanks so much, David.
A reminder for those of you with access to the Internet, you can watch Lawmakers online. Visit our website at gpb.org for more information. Click on Watch Online, then follow the instructions for watching live or looking at past Lawmakers programs in our archives. That website address again is gpb.org, just another way we keep you apprised of what's going on at the Georgia General Assembly.
We'd like to recommend another website that's a valuable resource for information about the Georgia General Assembly. Go to www.legis.state.ga.us. That website is also a great research tool that we here at Lawmakers use on a regular basis.
Back to the news. Former State Senator Carol Jackson announced today that she's running for a statewide office in 2006.
Today, I'm here to officially announce my candidacy for the Secretary of State for the great state of Georgia. Thank you. This is the people's office, where records are kept, where elections are administered, and where registrations are tendered. This is the office where our history is carefully preserved. In fact, when elected, I will carry this pledge through by asking the governor and the legislature to help me ensure that the election for the office of Secretary of State in future elections will be nonpartisan.
Jackson also said that if elected Secretary of State, she would consider providing a paper trail as a backup to Georgia's electronic voting system. Well, Carol Jackson is not the only one considering a run for statewide office in '06. That's one of the topics I discussed with one of our regular contributors, Tom Crawford, national editor of CapitalImpact.com. Well, as we just saw, Carol Jackson, a Democrat, is announced for Secretary of State. We're at late in January of 2005, and people are already lining up to run for state office in November of 2006. Why the rush?
Well, campaigns seem to start earlier and earlier, Gerald, and I think the precursor of this was Johnny Isakson, who you'll remember announced in January 2 years ago that he would run for the Senate, kicking off, what was it, a 21 or a 22-month campaign. And that seems to be becoming the normal routine now for anyone who wants to run for statewide office.
Carol Jackson had an interesting take. Although she is running as a Democrat, she said she's going to run on a platform to have that become a nonpartisan race if she does win.
Right, and her feeling is that since the Secretary of State serves as the chief elections official for the entire state of Georgia, that it might be better if that office were nonpartisan and not connected with either the Democratic or the Republican Party. Although she was quick to say she thinks Kathy Cox and her predecessors had all done a very good job as the chief elections officer for Georgia.
I understand you've talked with a prominent Republican who is also looking to get in that Secretary of State's race. Tell us about that.
Well, Senate Majority Leader Bill Stevens told me today that he is leaning very strongly towards running for Secretary of State, although he will not make an announcement either way, he said, until after the session is over. Another state senator, Mike Crotts, who was in the Senate until the end of last year, said he's also very interested in running.
So we're getting a full slate there, perhaps on both sides. And for the lieutenant governor's race in 2006, there's been a familiar face to some Georgians and certainly to Republicans. Ralph Reed has been around the Capitol this week.
Well, that's right. Ralph was visiting several members of the Senate, Republican members, I should say, on Tuesday to talk to them about a possible race for lieutenant governor. He's thinking very seriously about it, and as you know, Gerald, some of the media sources in Washington say Ralph may even decide to run for governor and president one day, so that's a race with a lot of implications.
Well, yes, we've also got Senator Casey Cagle interested in that race, as well as the insurance commissioner, John Oxendine.
Right. John Oxendine has already been raising money, in fact, to run for lieutenant governor. Casey Cagle's made no secret that he's interested in running, and there is a petition being circulated right now among the Republican senators. Quite a few of them, I understand, are signing off to show their support for Casey Cagle in the lieutenant governor's race.
Let's get into some of the issues and some of the legislation. I understand that tort reform we may be seeing debated very soon.
That's right. The Senate Judiciary Committee will be taking up the tort reform bill tomorrow, Thursday, and I understand that they're going to vote it out at that time. It could come up for a vote on the Senate floor as early as next Tuesday. That's a major issue, as you know, Gerald, not only for this session, but for the last 2 or 3, and it might be moving through pretty quickly.
And finally, I think you are among those who are seeing this session breaking out as one that is fairly well scripted.
It certainly is, and an example of that was yesterday when Governor Perdue had a news conference to announce his plans for a land conservation program. And before he even had a chance to get in front of the cameras and start talking about it, I was already getting emails from the House Resources Committee that they were going to put it on their calendar for the next day and vote it out. So things are moving to a very tight script, and I think the House leadership has to do that if they want to get everybody out of here by day 38, which is their goal, as you know.
That is indeed their goal. Tom Crawford from CapitalImpact.com, one of our favorite guests. We always enjoy your insights into the legislative process, Tom.
Thank you, Gerald.
An organizational meeting today in the Senate Transportation Committee allowed the opportunity to hear a presentation about a proposed light rail line around the city of Atlanta. A group called the Friends of the Belt Line was not pushing any legislation, but Chairman Tommy Williams wanted the committee to be informed about the proposal since the State Department of Transportation owns part of the rail line.
We all know that the traffic problem in the metro area and frankly in some of the other cities around the state is really getting to be untenable. What's also important, we think, in terms of transportation both in Atlanta and in the region is that it hooks up to MARTA, that we continue our investment on a system that we already have. And so this hooks up to MARTA at the 4 compass points plus 1, at Lindbergh Station, Inman Park, West End, Ashby Street, and Bankhead. So it really forms a circle around the city through some of the densest parts of our neighborhoods.
Well, the Beltline would surround the Atlanta downtown area with 22 miles of pre-existing rail line and would connect as many as 45 in-town neighborhoods. The line is currently owned by 5 different entities, including the City of Atlanta, the State Department of Transportation, and Gwinnett developer Wayne Mason. The Friends of the Beltline say that the project would be public and private venture, but would not require any funding from the General Assembly.
Well, things at the Capitol were a little more relaxed today. Advocates of alternative medicine stressed their message while relieving stress. Lawmakers Angela Vondrasek has more on that story.
Members of CAMA, the Complementary Alternative Medical Association, gathered at the Capitol today to inform citizens about the importance of medical freedom and choice.
The freedom to choose the healthcare modality that you desire, whether it's homeopathy or whether it's hypnotherapy or whether it's allopathic medicine, those are rights that need to be preserved.
CAMA provides a variety of resources to those interested in alternative medicine.
We understand that at times drugs and surgery are necessary, but what we promote is natural health care, such as massage, reflexology, homeopathy, hypnotherapy, and of course eating organic foods. I'm here to fight for more freedom in health care, more choices, so the providers that I want are available close to my home.
Visitors who attended the event today learned about many different types of alternative medicine, including massage. The association also participates in monthly lectures, health fairs, and healthy lifestyle workshops that emphasize natural healing. I'm Angela Vondrasek for Lawmakers.
Well, under the Gold Dome today, cell phones were drowned out by saxophones and xylophones. Lawmakers Ashley Poland has more.
Beautiful music echoed throughout the halls of Georgia's Capitol today. Students from Winder Barrow Middle School traveled 70 miles this morning to showcase their talent under the Gold Dome. Always a crowd pleaser, Andrew Lloyd Webber's award-winning Phantom of the Opera drew the attention of Senator Ralph Hudgens of Comer as they played his favorite song.
Just as I walked up, they started playing the Phantom of the Opera, which is just one of my favorite songs.
Although the students all enjoyed their field trip to the Capitol, their favorite part was...
Well, we've been going up and down the elevators.
Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Ashley Poland.
Going up and down the elevators in the Capitol is fun. Well, coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, it's the 10th anniversary of Georgia's Universal Pre-K funded by the lottery. We'll explain how that program works and show you some adorable 4-year-olds. Plus, a reminder that Lawmakers will be broadcast at 7:30 p.m. tomorrow. Be sure to tune in at 7 p.m. for the live broadcast of A Conversation, Educational Excellence with Governor Sonny Perdue, State School Superintendent Kathy Cox, and Education Finance Task Force Chair Dean Alford. That's tomorrow at 7. If you've missed any part of this broadcast, tune in when Lawmakers is rebroadcast tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. on GPB. Coming up next on Georgia Public Broadcasting, Life Laundry, the program that is next. That's program is next here on Georgia Public Broadcasting.
Well, I think we'll go head up on some of those elevators. Well, this is actually our program for the 6th legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Nwandi Lawson.
And I'm Gerald Bryant. For everyone here at Lawmakers, good night.
Good night.